Trancing in the sheets. It's time for things to change.
Hi, my name's Kaz Riley, and this is Trancing in the Sheets, where we talk about all kinds of things to do with sex and hypnosis and therapy and lots of other cool and amazing stuff. And today I've got the very wonderful Jayne Wesler, who has got so many talents and accolades and distinctions to her name, not only an author, but also a lawyer, a psychotherapist, a social worker, and lots of other things. And she has written the most amazing book called It Hurts So Good, an Orgasm of Tears. And we're going to talk about that today, just how there are so many amazing similarities between an orgasm and having a really good cry. So welcome, Jayne. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm so delighted to be here with the amazing Kaz Riley after meeting you and write a book with Richard and reading your fantastic book. I'm just really excited to be sitting down with you to talk about this fascinating issue. I think it's fascinating to look at the parallels between what goes on in the body, and the mind, really. We're one whole organism, mind-body connection, and we're talking about being connected with other people too in various ways, aren't we?
Absolutely. Now, what I really love about this is, there's such a taboo around talking about sex. And the other thing that I often see, or the thing that clients will often apologize for when they're sat in this office, actually, is they will burst into tears. And often the immediate thing they immediately do is apologize for it. There's a huge amount of shame around that feeling of that need to cry, isn't there? Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. That's really one of the main reasons that I wrote this book. That, and just the fact that all of my life I've been really paying attention to what goes on in my body and wondering about what exactly was going on when I felt those sensations in the body. So I finally I made a change in my life about 2.5 years ago. Coincidentally, it was a year before COVID, and I moved out of a full-time litigation position, and it was time for me to write my books. So I did a professional book first about my career in helping parents of children with special needs, and then I had been really gripped by this in my life. Partly just because I thought it was fascinating. I knew something was going on in my body when I would have certain emotions, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that and kind of map it out. But I'd also been criticized by people, and so I do cry easily. I cry sometimes when I'm upset or at a beautiful sunset or something very moving. And that doesn't mean I go around crying all over the place. I really don't cry that much, but when I do, sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. And people have said to me over the years, "You're too sensitive." And I finally realized, you know what? They're too hard-hearted. They're too insensitive. And maybe that's not even fair. Maybe the pendulum has to swing. There's all kinds of people in the world. But so that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I actually had a family member say to me at a very difficult meeting over something wrenching that had happened in the family. And we actually had a meeting of the adults from far and wide to sit down to say, what are we going to do about this? And my daughter was there, and she was crying, and she's not a crier. And so I got teary-eyed. And someone at the meeting said to me, "Get a hold of yourself." Like, oh, this is not the appropriate place to, shed a couple of tears. And so it was that kind of blowback that I also thought was really inappropriate. And it's interesting that you point that out, and sad to me. that we feel that we have to apologize for showing a public display of emotion, or even, a semi public. Maybe, you're with a family member or a friend, and you cry and you say, "I'm sorry."
Absolutely. It's something with tears, isn't it? Especially, it's something that we're taught that we don't cry, especially men. Are taught that men shouldn't cry. And actually, the thing I always say to my clients is, our bodies don't do things that they're not supposed to do, and where, that there is no shame in having a good cry. And ultimately, it makes us feel better. It is a release, whether that's, we're crying because something has made us overwhelmed with pride. Sometimes, I will cry, or, or we're desperately sad. But I know when you kind of looked, when I read through your book, which is just the most wonderful, wonderful book, it's so insightful and it's so compassionate, which, the world certainly needs more of that. What do you think? What are the reasons that you think people become, when they become locked down? I know you call that a blue heart. You kind of, compare it to that feeling of when we talk about somebody having blue balls, or the female version of that is pink walls, isn't it? Where there's all this kind of sensual, sexual tension that's not being released, but that kind of emotional release. I know you call that a blue heart. So tell us a bit more about that.
Well, thank you for that, because as I was thinking about these concepts in preparation to come on the show, I was thinking it's really not accurate to say, well, we have blue balls and blue hearts. That's true, but it's not only that. And I was thinking women need sexual release and men need emotional release. So what are we calling women's sexual frustration? And you just told me pink walls. So I had never heard that before. So I just learned something new. Thank you. That's awesome. Yes, a blue heart. Blue heart is not healthy. Yes, of course, sometimes we're blue, we're sad, we have depressed feelings. That is normal. As you said, the body doesn't do things it's not supposed to do. But we don't want to stay stuck there. And emotional tears are the body's and the mind's way and the heart's way of reaching homeostasis and ridding the body of toxic chemicals. And so the body is so smart, actually like the earth. And it's interesting that we've come through a lockdown and no one was driving anywhere, and the earth started to heal itself. And there's such a wisdom and such a foundation there that we find in ourselves and in our bodies. Our bodies know how to heal themselves, sometimes, or so when we cry, we are moving toward homeostasis. And if you look at tears, they're not all created equal. There's 3 different kinds, and emotional tears have a different makeup than the other 2, and they actually do rid the body of different toxic chemicals and help us to just feel better. And your audience, I'm sure, can think of a time where they've wept for various reasons. Just makes you feel better.
It is such an important release, isn't it? When we, it's not just a release of emotion, it is a release of toxins. But when we talk about kind of toxins in the body, we often don't equate that to our emotions. When we think about where things haven't been kind of released, or things like depression and anxiety, where things are kind of stuck, aren't they? They're kind of emotions are stuck within the body, or it's been unresolved, if you like. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that the only thing somebody needs to do is have a good cry to get rid of those things, but it sure does help. Often when we see people in our practices that are really locked down that way. One of the things that they often say is that they're unable to cry. It's like it's stuck inside of them somehow, and they just can't get that kind of release. So what do you say to people if they come in and say to you, I'm kind of locked down, I've lost the ability to cry, or I don't seem able to? How do you approach that?
Well, first, I think I would say that's normal under certain circumstances where you've been repressing, or maybe there's been a traumatic event, or someone said something to you that was so hurtful, and it was a person very close to you, and so you don't feel safe anymore. We need to feel safe because these types of uh, activities, sexual activity and emotional intimacy, are activities that we want to feel safe in. And so if you don't feel safe, then we are so guarded. It's sort of like the way that a pearl is created when there's a bit of sand and the coating is just created over and over and over, and it kind of locks that in. And then you have the beautiful luminescent pearl. Here, you look at that other part of the pearl, and that's that hard coating that just prevents you from getting inside. And so first of all, I would say that it's a normal thing. So just relax and accept where you're at, and welcome that into your heart. Be grateful for this repression, this inability, because it has protected you. It has made you feel safe. But you don't want to stay that way. And so you begin to explore where you might feel safe. In what relationship are you safe, or can you be made safe? One of the neat things about emotional tears is that it is a way to get connected with people. It's a distress signal. It helps people bond socially. And so I think for a lot of people, for myself included, we feel that we have to be strong all the time. We can't show, oh, God forbid, you should show your weakness. And I learned later in life that other people appreciate seeing that you have a weakness, because they have a weakness and they know they have a weakness, but we're all worried about measuring up, and we compare ourselves, which I think is really sad, because everyone out there is a unique person and has unique gifts and qualities to share with one another and with the world. And so I would say just, find a place where you can be safe, and recognize that when you show your vulnerability to others, you're helping them. I wrote in, I did a workbook of Orgasm for Tears, and I wrote a little inscription in there that says that my tears are my gift to you. It shows that I trust you. I'm not going to, no matter how upset I am, I'm not going to cry in front of somebody unless I feel that I could trust that person. So they have to get comfortable. And if it's just that they have to get comfortable with themselves, then that's where they have to start. And there are ways that you can provoke tears. Might seem artificial, but we have to do that sometimes. It's sort of like in the olden days when you had to prime the pump on your pump to get the water out. You had to pour down a little water to pump it back up. One of the things that affects people is depending on your sensory system. Some people are mainly visual, some people are mainly auditory, kinesthetic. So it would be good to tap into what is your main representational system, your main sensory system. I happen to be equally split between visual and auditory. And so looking at a picture, watching a video of a service woman or man coming home to surprise their child somewhere, that always moves me to tears. So you find something simple like that, a simple story, and it's like an arrow to your heart. It will pierce. It will happen. And they just have to believe that for a while until it does.
It is. And I guess sometimes it's about people seeing the value in having that kind of vulnerability around somebody, or just for themselves as well. You know, if we look at like the work of like Brene Brown, for example, you know, and we always see that, don't we? If we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, then we allow love into our lives and love into our hearts, which allows us to live our lives in a more wholehearted way. And if we acknowledge our emotions and we acknowledge our tears and we actually value them, you know, we kind of see the purpose behind them, then that allows us, doesn't it, to embrace life more fully, because we're not shielding ourselves the whole time with the fear that we might cry or it might cause some kind of amazing emotion, you know, inside of us. And we know those spikes of emotion are powerful things and necessary things as well. That's the other thing, isn't it? You know, it's a very necessary kind of a state to be in. Sometimes we just need to let it all out, don't we? You know, and let go, you know. And that's the other thing, I think, you know, crying allows people to let go. And it's such an essential part of, you know, the process of crying, isn't it? Is allowing that kind of let go.
And allowing that let go, and finding in the letting go that I'm acceptable, I belong, and there's nothing about me that I need to hide. I'm not so flawed that other people won't accept the real me. And I think there's a lot of that, you know, there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome and how we all feel that we're not competent. And again, there's an interdependence between people, and we have to, for our health, to find that vulnerability and share that vulnerability, at least with someone. One famous physician from your side of the pond, Sir Henry Maudsley, said that sorrows that don't give vent in tears cause the organs to weep. That was some insight he had. And I think it was from years of practice to see that repression, what that does to you. And so if your tears dry up, the rest of your fluids can dry up too, and that's not a good thing. And conversely, Kaz, I see that, you know, people who are comfortable crying and opening themselves up to sexuality and, you know, finding their joy, finding their pleasure, they're going to find all of that. And just to anybody listening, just because you and I, we know a lot about this, you help people to heal, I help people to heal. That doesn't mean we're perfect either. And that doesn't mean we have it all. You know, I certainly stumble over this, but I've learned along the way. And so I wrote the book to share the knowledge, knowing that there's a lot of men and women out there who need to hear it, but who also have a lot to share too. And I'm hoping that they're not comparing themselves and saying, oh, I really need to be better. No, you just need to be yourself.
I think as well, you know, this is a biological thing as well. You know, this isn't just an emotional thing. There are so many similarities. I'll try and get my words out. But when we look at things like when we talk about orgasm, we get that kind of vasoconstriction, and that kind of builds and builds and builds and builds until we get this orgasmic release, both in men and women. And the same thing actually happens with tears, isn't it? There's this build up of tension, and then eventually it's released out in the form of tears. So this is, you know, very, and both feel good, you know, even when we're kind of, you know, we're kind of, people talk about ugly crying, don't they? We're kind of really ugly crying, you know. I don't think there's anything ugly about crying actually, but you know, that's the phrase that they use. But afterwards, often people, they have a similar kind of thing. They want to be held, they want to be cuddled, they want to feel close to somebody. They're often quite tired and exhausted. It's that kind of feeling of like something just happened, and that release is there, and that needing to sleep and to rest, and all of that, you know, that need for intimacy often, isn't it? You know, often we just want to be held after we're crying, and sometimes, you know, held after we've just had sex or we've just had an orgasm. They are frighteningly similar in many ways, aren't they?
They're intimately related, and I love the term Crimex because it's a climax. It's just they're different and they're the same. They're both a complex physiological process. But if you look at, there is a trigger, there's arousal, and they're very similar. It might be images, it might be sounds, it might be a movie, it might be deprivation. And then there's tumescence, the engorgement. Well, you know, in the body, that's where you have the blue heart, you know, the buildup of pain or frustration, fatigue. You know, probably you've heard of the HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired acronym that we're taught to use in psychotherapy. And for our clients, that we want them to recognize, just to check in and say, okay, what's going on with me? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? What do I need right now? So it's important to be aware of yourself and your functioning. And so you have this tumescence, you have the blue heart, and then you have the release, the Crimex or the climax, whichever. And it's a complex physiological process. In sexual orgasm, you have two parts. There's emission and ejaculation. And in emotional tears, you have the brain sending signals to the lacrimal glands to produce the tears, but then they have to build up and then overflow. And one of the reasons that women cry more than men, and that was displayed in an amazing study of 37 countries. I was amazed when I found out that there are other people in the world who cared about emotional tears and had studied them. That was a man from the Netherlands. It was just amazing. But women's apparatus is a little bit smaller. And so, and we have a greater amount of the hormone prolactin in our bodies, which helps us to cry easier. But the lacrimal gland that runs from here down is like a little straw, whereas a man's is like a gutter. And so it dispenses with his tears, and they don't come out of his eyes so easily. And that's one reason why women do cry more. It has nothing to do with women being weaker. In fact, that is a modern day fallacy. It used to be that men and women cried equally, that men showed no feeling of weakness or shame when they cried. When you look back in history, the ancient Greeks cried, great warriors cried, and it was a manly thing to do. And it wasn't until the age of Enlightenment and industrialization, where they felt that crying might impact productivity, that they outlawed it in the workplace. And then it got to the point where in the Victorian era that, oh dear, you know, poor little weak women, the weaker sex, you have to let them cry because they're, you know, going to have the vapors and they need to get to the couch. But that is just not true. And there are plenty of women leaders who who lead well. They're not thrown off by any of their female hormones. Men have hormones too. And men are affected by their hormones, but actually emotion, as it was demonstrated by a controlled study by a psychologist, showed, and her colleagues, showed that emotion helped us to make good and accurate decisions, big decisions about how to lead countries, among others.
So when we're talking about, I mean, I'm British, so the archetype, isn't it, is that we have our stiff upper lip, that we don't show any kind of emotion, that we're, I always think when you think about even in kind of today's world, where you think about when Princess Diana died, and you saw the Princes William and Harry as children walking behind their mother's coffin recently, where the Duke of Edinburgh passed, and we have the Queen sat by herself at his funeral because of COVID, and people were kind of commenting that I'm sure she was crying. I mean, why on earth you wouldn't be crying at your husband's funeral? I mean, the amount of kind of repression that must take to stay so, I guess, well, they call it stoic, don't they, is a some people are very stoic, and we need to be sometimes, but sometimes that can be quite detrimental. And when we look at often what happens when people become locked down, then they become locked down in every area of their life. And sometimes, interestingly, one of the things that I often get where women will seek help from me sexually is that they cry when they orgasm, and they're embarrassed about it. So they and it's like they can't help it. Sometimes what I remember, sometimes the women will say to me that they become not hysterical. I mean, that's a Victorian word, isn't it, that was used to kind of really suppress women. But they will become very emotional, and that scares them. But often when I dig a little bit deeper, they're often not emotional anywhere else. So it's kind of like the body goes, well, here's our chance, isn't it? And we can sneak out right now. Is that I mean, I can see how that happens. Is that something that you've heard a lot about, of this kind of, when we actually get the two together, we get the tears and the orgasm together?
Yes. I was thinking about it, actually, because they do often go together. And there was another study done about that, which was so interesting, because men cried during, and maybe during orgasm, or just after, as much as the women did. So please share that with any of your clients, that I think maybe people don't like to be out of control. We don't like to feel out of control because, who knows what might happen. But hey, look what happens. It's pretty good. You have a climax and you have a Crimex, and then you're so bonded with your significant other. What could be better than that moment? So they do go hand in hand. But I think people don't want to feel out of control. Women don't want to be called hysterical, although why not? Because you probably remember that I pointed out in the book, that hysterical simply means acting like a wombed creature. And so if you have a uterus, you are a hysterical creature. Very funny. So, the astronauts who are female, they're hysterical when they go into space. Female race car drivers are hysterical when they win races. Olympians, female Olympians, are hysterical when they win bronze and silver and gold medals. The list could go on. It's just a label that is put on women to denigrate and keep us in our place. Yeah. And I think a lot of men don't do that anymore, but unfortunately, you still do see that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, well, it was Freud, wasn't it? Who kind of changed that from just meaning with womb to meaning like a mental health condition. And often you'll hear people say when they're crying, or somebody will say to them, "There's no need to be hysterical," and it's like, well, actually, they're just crying, you know. And you know, and that's a good thing, because if they're not, you know, you have such a wealth of experience and expertise. So, you know, I know you've worked with families fighting to get the kind of children the tools that they need and the rights that they have that have got learning disabilities. I know you've worked as a licensed social worker, I believe, as well, psychotherapist. You've worked in some high security prisons. You know, a massive wealth of knowledge, as well as being, an attorney as well. So you must have seen throughout all of that just what the consequences can be of people not giving themselves permission or not being given permission to cry. What can the consequences be? Because I think this is the thing, if we understand the purpose behind something, we can we can give ourselves permission to prevent things, can't we? Yeah.
Yes, and as you're talking, I see people and I see scenarios going through my mind. When I was a fairly young psychotherapist, I had a man come to me. He was beside himself because he couldn't get an erection. He couldn't make love with his wife, and he was so concerned that something was wrong with him. And I started off normalizing what he was going through. She had cheated on him, and so he was very much impacted, significantly impacted by that. And so we normalized it, and then we progressed from there. And I remember running into him on the street one day, and he came running up to me and he said, "I just wanted to tell you, everything's going great." But it's what happens in your mind, and that repression of all of those emotions. It actually physically impacted him, so he could not have an erection. I was working on a locked psychiatric unit at an urban hospital. It's called the CCIS in the States, Children's Crisis Intervention Services. And the kids there were admitted after attempting suicide or homicide or both. And so you would see the kids in a lot of pain. And really what they needed was someone to be there, and someone to whom they could go and be safe with. But a lot of the kids had been, parentified. Their family systems were out of whack, sometimes for no fault of anyone, but circumstances impacted the family. Sometimes it was genetic, but what you would see in that setting, and also a lot of the students whose parents came to me for help, they would cut themselves, cutting, self-injury. And they were doing that, taking a razor blade or an X-Acto knife and just, cutting on their thighs. I'm sure you've seen it. And that helped them be distracted from the emotional pain. So first of all, what does that tell you? Emotional pain is real and it hurts. And the only way some of these kids could deal with it was to create this physical pain by injuring themselves like that. So it's something that we all must pay attention to. It's good for all of us to keep our eyes open, because there are people in our midst who maybe put on a happy face. People know how to do it, from 8 to 5 or whatever, and then they go home and maybe feel miserable, and even sometimes contemplate suicide. And that is, as we know, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. There's, something that I talk about in the book called the feedback loop. So when we anesthetize ourselves, or when we hide our tears, it creates this negative feedback loop that we're telling everybody, I'm fine, I don't need anything. But I'm also not being my authentic self, so I'm not connecting with people. And it starts to limit our social interactions. And then it gets worse, because then we're interacting with less people, and we're not feeling safe, and we're not sharing how we feel with other people. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And, they say that loneliness is the new smoking. We've been saying that for years, right? And it's so true. It is not healthy to be isolated from other people. So, you know what? Let the tears out. Let people know that you're vulnerable. You might get hurt. We all get hurt. It's part of the human condition, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there is help to be found, and there are people in the world who have empathy. There are people in the world who are kind. There are people in the world who are compassionate. There's a lot of us out there, and sometimes we need people, and sometimes they need us. And so it's something that it's worth paying attention to.
One of the things that I often hear is when people say, I don't need anybody, or I need not to need anybody. And, and when you kind of question that more, what they are actually is numb. It's not that they're okay. It's, they're often putting, as we say, like the kind of facade out to the world of who they are, but actually they're really numb. They're not feeling very much of anything. And that's a very lonely place to be, even if you are actually even socializing within that, because you're actually completely disconnected. If you're going through life feeling numb, which is often, how people describe it, isn't it? They're just kind of numb to, they're not feeling anything, which then stops them having the kinds of connections and relationships and intimacy and joy and feeling pleasure, because they're just not really feeling anything for the sake of. And sometimes people, they, especially we talk about, some of the people that you've worked with in the past, some of those children that were, they weren't just shamed for their crying, they were punished for crying. Or they were beaten for crying, or they were told if they carried on crying, something bad would happen, or if they did cry, something bad would happen. And, lots of people have that, don't they? Where, they actually get to the point where they fear that release, that emotion. So everything gets shut down, and eventually they just become numb to the world and numb to themselves and numb to their needs and numb to everything. How would you help somebody? Or I mean the workbook is absolutely fantastic that you've got to help people to kind of start to embrace that part of them, that part of being human. It's not even just themselves, it's part of everybody, isn't it? That ability, that need to cry, and to do that in different circumstances as well. Like you say, it's not just emotional tears. We've got other kinds of tears. Sometimes it's relief, sometimes we just do, sometimes our eyes just water, if we've got allergies or something, but even that feels good, doesn't it? It's cleaning the stuff out of our eyes. So if somebody's kind of at the point where they're really numb, they've got that numbness, and they're starting to listen to, like you say, maybe they're listening to some music and they're just noticing how that makes them feel, even that if that's just a tiny shift from where they were. How can they kind of go about building upon that, so they can get to the point where they do get that release, and they're allowed, they give themselves permission wholeheartedly to let go and to have a good cry?
Well, that is a great question. And you make a good point when you talk about the numbness. If we think about how do we get numb? How does the body get numb if your circulation gets cut off? If you're sleeping and you're sleeping on your arm and you wake up and, there's been no blood flow, and it actually hurts and it's numb and it's tingling and it kind of hurts even when it's doing that. If you're numb emotionally, that means something's been cut off. And so we have to find out, where is this getting cut off, and stop that at first. And it could hurt. Once you allow that flow to get back in there, it might hurt. I think music, as you pointed out, is a powerful, provocative way to release tears. For me, so if people think about it, if they just play some music that means something to them, that can really immediately take them to a place, or smell sometimes even. There was a song that always immediately makes me cry. So I rate things in the book, and the most effective thing to make us cry is an arrow, because it's swift, it's powerful, and it just goes straight to the heart and opens you up. And so there is a song that was redone by Israel. What is it? Makawiwo Ole. I know that's not exactly right, but he was a Hawaiian musician, and he did a rendition of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." He looked a lot like my cousin Sam, who died suddenly, and it never fails to make me cry. And I think most people are going to have some songs that resonate in their hearts. And so I would just encourage them to start looking to see, when do they feel a tender moment. Sometimes it happens when we least expect it. Or you can sit down and go on YouTube and find some of those videos of the military people coming home to surprise their children. I think that's probably going to do it if you have a strong sense of country, of loyalty. If you're a parent or you're a child, and all of us are children, and a lot of us have been hurt or maybe didn't get the love we wanted, because what family is perfect? And so just start paying attention to what sensory avenues are important, and the music, stories, movies, and those kind of videos, or the beauty of nature can really do it. And so those are some places to start and to grow.
And I think that's it as well. It's understanding that tears, we all have, when we think about, I mean, a good example, I was driving home from teaching last weekend, and just listening to, my iPods on the, just flicking through at random. And suddenly the song Woman by John Lennon came on. And I could feel the tears coming, and I was like, oh my word. And then, I realized that was a song that we played at my mother's funeral, and it just has such a strong emotional kind of tie to it. And yet then we get those other kinds of tears as well, where, I'm the mother of 2 children, I watch, sometimes when I watch them do something really amazing, it could be that they're just something that makes them really happy, or they just do something that's just so beautiful, loving, cute, whatever you want to call it, where you feel that overwhelming love in your heart that can bring you to tears. It's been moved to tears, isn't it? It's not always about being desperately sad. But if we allow ourselves to do that, if we give ourselves permission to do that, not only do we learn to process all the sadness and the things that hold us back and the things that help us numb, but then we also learn how to embrace joy and love and all the amazing feelings, is it? When we talk about anxiety in the body and excitement, for example, it's actually, physiologically a very similar thing. It's what we decide it is. So, we can be moved to tears for very many reasons, just as in the same way, there are many things that can arouse us sexually. It could be something that we remember. It could be a memory that we have. It could be something, anticipation that can either make us very nervous or very excited, can't it? And it's a similar kind of thing really when we're talking about the ability to cry, and thank goodness that we can. Are there other species of animals that cry? I don't know. Is that a unique human gift that we have, or are there other species that also shed tears?
Well, you're exactly right. The way you put it, I love that. It's a unique human gift. No other animal sheds emotional tears. We are it. It's kind of surprising, really, when you think about the other animals that are on the earth and the things that we have discovered about them. I mean, dolphins and whales and elephants, for example, and birds, their intricate social networks and how they care for one another. And yet we are the only animal on the face of the earth that sheds human tears. I don't know why.
It truly
I'm thinking about it really is a gift. And we should open that gift and use that gift and not make excuses when we're not feeling safe. Then we shouldn't push ourselves when we're not feeling safe. I wouldn't want anyone to do that, but I would encourage anyone listening who feels that way to find out how you can make yourself safe. What is it that's not safe? Ask yourself. And how can you make it safe for yourself? Because you get one life, it's not a dress rehearsal. And so it's time to show up and live your life, because as we know, life is short and tomorrow isn't guaranteed.
What an amazing kind of point to kind of finish this conversation for today. Tell us, Jayne, where can we find? I know, this is only one of a series of amazing books that you've written. Where can we find all the stuff about you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I have a website. It's jaynewesler.com. It's you have to spell my name right though. So it's JayneWesler. And you can find my books there or on Amazon. So easy. Amazon makes it very easy. So those are the two principal places. People can get in touch with me for whatever reason. And I also actually have a Facebook group called An Orgasm of Tears. And so if people want to get in touch, if people are out there struggling, if they, there's pros and cons about Facebook. Sometimes it helps isolate us more, but if you're already isolated and you want to reach out, it's the same name as the book, Hurts So Good, An Orgasm of Tears. Join, and people post different things about ways to get your cry on.
and there's just so many different ways. It's a lovely group. I know I'm in there. We'll obviously put all your links. So if you're wanting to get hold of Jayne, just check out the description here that's attached to this video, and you can link straight through to Jayne's website. Thank you so much for first of all for writing this much needed book, because I think it gives people permission to do something that's actually an essential part of being human. It's part of the things, as you say, we're the only species that are able to do this. And it truly is a gift, to heal. It's a healing gift, we talk about from healing from within. So thank you so much for sharing your time, your compassion, your love, and your wisdom with us today, Jayne. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, my great pleasure, and it's just a delight to be on your show with the amazing Kaz Riley, because the work you're doing in the world is par to none. And I think, again, and Kaz didn't ask me to do this, but I just have to say, this book I read and was amazed by, and I think it should be part of every school curriculum, every high school curriculum. So people out there, don't shortchange yourselves.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. So, if you're liking what you're seeing here today on Trancing in the Sheets, we cover all kinds of topics. I would love to have you a subscriber. So click the subscribe button. Please like this video. Leave all your comments. If you've got anything that you want to ask Jayne and you want to leave them in the comments, so you've just got a comment to make about, maybe it's a great idea on how to get your cry on. I don't know. Share it with us. Pop it down in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Trancing in the Sheets.
Now's the time to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the notification bell to be kept up to date with all the latest content from Trancing in the Sheets. My book, Woman, How to Find, Understand and Embrace Your Sexual Pleasure, is now available from all good bookstores. Visit KazRileyWoman.com for lots of amazing, great free resources to help you along your journey.